What is up? Welcome back to another edition of the PFF podcast. I'm Mike Renner, joined with Steve Palazzolo here. And before we get into it, we wanted to bring up again the fact that we're giving away a free subscription to PFF Elite, $200 value every week. If you guys just go rate us 5 stars on iTunes, leave a review, leave your name and a way to contact you, an email, Twitter handle, something so we can get in touch with you. We're picking one every single week. We also have deals going on with FanDuel and DraftKings, ProFootballFocus.com/FanDuel17, ProFootballFocus.com/DraftKings17. You deposit $10 there, you get PFF Edge for free, a $40 value. You guys, we love these tools. We use them all the time. We think you guys will too. Go ahead and do both or either of those. Either way, we have a mailbag for you today. I'm excited because I tried to get in last week's mailbag actually, but I was on the road and I was a little late. I was actually thinking about recording it while I was driving, just hopping in and doing it because I love mailbags that much. I can't believe Steve and Sam left me out. Steve, what was going through your mind there trying to go behind my back and do that podcast?
You know, you sent me a message as we were wrapping up the show. And I tried, you know what I said? Live on the show, we're just going to call you in and you didn't answer. So don't say that we hung you out to dry or that we left you out. We called you into the mailbag show to answer some questions and you just didn't answer. You weren't available.
I know. I'm pretty sad about that one, but it was a great show. So we thought we'd do it again. I love mailbags. I love answering you guys' questions. We're trying to be far more open and, transparent with our, just what we do behind the scenes, to try to appease you guys as much as we do. So let's get right into it. Off the top.
We might make this a regular segment too, Mike. If we continue to get a good flow of questions, this could be a big part of the.
We have some really good questions today. So that's why let's get right into it. Vitor HS Camargo asked us, "What are your takes on Bell's? I can only assume Le'Veon Bell's and DJ. Again, I'm assuming David Johnson's value nowadays, schematically and dollars." What is it, Steve?
So we're talking about, high-end running backs. I think the running back position is being devalued. You hear that all the time. What does that mean exactly? I think it means, you can find running backs anywhere, so to speak, middle rounds, free agency from a guy like David Johnson who was not a first-round pick and turns into one of the league's best. Le'Veon Bell, a second-round pick, turns into one of the league's best. Marshawn Lynch, was one of the elite running backs when he was in the league and now back in the league. Seattle gets him through trade. So you can find running backs in different places. So people think maybe they're completely interchangeable, but I still think the top end elite running backs, your David Johnsons, your Le'Veon Bells, guys that affect the pass game as well. Guys that could be mismatches in the pass game, split out wide, catch the ball and turn a short pass into a big gain. I think those guys are extremely valuable. So as far as schematically and how much they affect the game, the pass game is clearly the most important part of the NFL, but having a strong runner who can be a mismatch type of guy, I still think there's a place for him in the NFL.
I'll even go a step further and say I don't even necessarily need that pass aspect. Someone who can transcend and overcome a bad offensive line to me has a ton of value as well. It's sort of the whole, Russell Wilson thing. The Seahawks thought they could still have an above average offense without investing anything in their offensive line. If you don't have to invest in your offensive line and still have a strong running game, well, that has value to me as well. So I don't really necessarily need that receiving aspect. But what those guys bring to the table, Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson, I think is very much worth the $12 to $15 million a year range. The thing is, it's not worth a $60 million contract because it's so hard to stay at that level for 5 years over the course of a 4 or 5 year contract. But in one singular year, if you're going to get the best of a guy, I think it's definitely worth that much.
I think your offensive line point's a really good one. A guy like Jay Ajayi last year with Miami did not have a great offensive line. They really struggled on the interior. He leads the league with 58 forced missed tackles by far, 3.5 yards after contact. And there were so many games when I watched Miami play where he literally took 0 1-yard gains, turned them into 20-yard gains. And you saw that week after week. There is a ton of value in that. I'd say the other thing, too, I think the best offensive teams, it's not just about chucking the ball around the field or establishing the run. I think that the best offensive teams can completely adjust to whatever the defense is giving them. So there are times, you see the Patriots do this all the time, right? They'll come out in some games and they're like, you know what, Tom Brady, it's your game. Throw the ball 50 times. We're not running the ball. Other times they do try to run the ball and, mix it up. And that balance on offense isn't necessarily a 50-50 split of run pass. To me, balance is being able to attack the defense multiple ways. Short pass game, deep pass game, the run game, whatever it might be, whatever the defense is giving you. So that's where I do think there still is value for at least those top end elite type running backs.
That is 100%. That is the key point here. And it's the fact that defensive coordinators in the league still worry about the run. As much as, the pass game matters, as much as having an effective passing attack is very important to, ultimately winning a Super Bowl. At the end of the day, if you can have a strong running game to go with that, it just makes your passing game better because, like you said, if you can get a favorable look in the passing game, you go into a passing play. If you can get a favorable look in the running game, you go into a running play. And if you can be effective in both of those areas, it just makes your offense that much more dynamic. So while people will always say, teams that lead the league in rushing have never won, don't win Super Bowls, whatever, that sort of thing, heavy run teams haven't been that successful, of late. The balance is the key there. It's the fact that you can do both no matter what the defense is giving, whatever the defense is giving you, you can exploit is the biggest thing to me.
Completely agree. And I'll wrap it up with this. Not the quest for the quote unquote elite quarterback. Everybody's looking for it, but only a handful of teams truly have that quarterback that you can completely rely on. A handful of teams have a quarterback that, might be able to get to that tier. But a bunch of teams have average quarterbacks, but average quarterbacks can, lead a 10-win team if they have the right pieces around them. A lot of times the running back is one of those key pieces. So, some teams have to rely on the running back more than others.
There you have it. All right, on to the next one. Here, this question comes from Chad Schulte 1. Are the 2017 New York Jets a worse team than the 0-16 Detroit Lions? Also, can I have an elite subscription? Yeah, you can have an elite subscription. Just leave a 5-star review on our podcast here. But 0-16 Lions, Steve, are the Jets this year worse? I think I said earlier, like when they cut Eric Decker, that this was the least amount of offensive talent I've seen since I started working at PFF, and I stand by that still.
They do look really bad on paper. As far as the elite subscription, I would suggest, go and leave the review. And if you don't win this week, come back next week with a different email address, a different account, leave another review. Just keep leaving reviews until you win. That'd be my suggestion on the elite
maybe review some of the other podcasts on the PFF network. That might give you a chance to.
Take your same name, review the Pro podcast, the Fantasy podcast, the Big Time Throwcast, and the Drafts podcast, because we're all running the same contest. That's great advice, Mike. I love it. Here's my answer. If Christian Hackenberg is the quarterback of the New York Jets in 2017, then yes, they're worse than the 0-16 Detroit Lions. That's it.
The thing is, they're kind of the opposite. That 2008 Lions team had talent offensively. You had Calvin Johnson. You had Roy Williams. You had an offensive line that wasn't awful. You had someone like Dominic Raiola, Gosder Cherilus, Jeff Backus. These were guys who were not terrible offensive linemen. It wasn't a bad offensive line. Obviously, you had that sort of revolving door of Dan Orlovsky, Dante Culpepper, and John Kitna at quarterback that was not doing them any favors. But it wasn't completely bereft of talent offensively. It was the other side of the ball that was getting them into trouble. Here was their highest graded player from that 08 season, Dwayne White. If anyone recalls the name, Dwayne White. I did not from that year, but he was their highest graded player, defensive lineman.
Louisville, 2003 second rounder. He was their highest grade, and it was not good. He did 7 sacks, 2 QB hits, 18 hurries. They did have Ernie Sims, who, former first-round pick. I don't want to say he's the butt of many jokes at PFF, but let's just say did not grade particularly well during his. I think it was the lowest graded season any linebackers ever had. It was very, very bad. And we have Sims' entire career graded 2006 through 13, and let me just say it's very poor. I'll say this about Sims: he was the friendliest linebacker in the NFL. He never met an offensive lineman he didn't want to give a hug to. There you go. So. But he was so fast. He was drafted off of speed and flying to the ball. But 2008 Lions, not good. the 2017 Jets, they do have defensive talent. You're right. It is kind of reversed. They have some talent on the defensive side, but man, that offense is going to struggle.
It could be close. I think they win 2 games max. I don't think they go 0-16 just because of how hard it is. But like you said, if Hackenberg starts 16 games, that's a very strong possibility. So
I don't really see that happening. Honestly, Josh McCown has bouts where he looks like a really good NFL quarterback, so he will stumble into a couple wins if he's the starter. Would be my prediction. Even though the Jets roster itself might actually be worse than the 2008 Lions.
All right, on to JR Batman 23 had a handful of questions. He was very inquisitive today. Asked us 3 different ones. We'll start off with, is it good draft strategy for a team to draft a QB every year, or does that seem a bit excessive?
I have a take on this. I've generally leaned toward yes on this. And now we have a newly born analytics department that's really been doing a good job of diving into the PFF data and, figuring out what it all means. And we were having a conversation the other day, myself and Mr. Eric Eager, who has been a key part of that analytics group, really smart guy. And he basically came to the realization, he said, you know what, the upside of getting a quarterback, I just said upside,
no, that makes sense in this context.
The payoff, the upside of getting that quarterback so far exceeds missing that it is worth taking that quarterback. In other words, if you're going to take a 3rd round pick, if you do hit on Russell Wilson, you might have a 5% chance of hitting on a Russell Wilson. But if you do, he is 20 times more valuable or 15 times more valuable than a miss is not valuable. Does that make sense? The upside is so high. Why not take that chance? I have another take on it too once I hear what your thoughts are.
No, I'm exactly the same way. I think until you have a top 10 quarterback, you go with one in the first 4 rounds of every draft. I think the first 4 rounds, by that point, you get someone with some sort of promise, the guy that showed something enough, guys like Cody Kessler, Dak Prescott, obviously. So in the first 4 rounds, I think until you have a top 10 quarterback, you keep taking your shot somewhere in that mix. Because like you said, the value over every other position is so great. The impact that it has on your team is so much. And even having a backup quarterback has so much value that you definitely do it. If the guy turns into a good backup quarterback, or you end up getting 2 starting caliber quarterbacks, the guy leaves and you get a high compensatory pick, or you trade him for a 2nd or 3rd, something like that. I don't think that. I just, like you said, the value of the quarterback position so far exceeds that you have to do it. You just have to do it.
All you have to do is complete a couple nice passes, and all of a sudden you go from a 4th or 5th round pick to a potential 1st round tradable commodity, right? The AJ McCarron, it doesn't always.
Alex Smith
end up that way.
Did end up getting traded for, was that 2nd? Which
it's before your time, but Rob Johnson of the Jaguars, he had 24 passes or something like that in 2007. Before you know it, the Bills trade for him for the 10th overall pick, which turns into Fred Taylor. But the NFL has always been kind of enamored with the backup quarterback, so there is that part of it too. So even if you have a quarterback, then you get another good backup and you develop him. A lot of times the NFL is so QB needy that you can, spin that into a couple extra picks. So my one other point that I wanted to add, you and I we were back at the combine, grabbing lunch. We ran into an NFL executive, just started talking, and he came from a team that drafted a quarterback over the last couple of years, and we went through this hypothetical situation. What if, when you need a quarterback, you just drafted a quarterback in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th round, something like that in a given draft? Instead of perhaps, when teams, they trade up and they, go get their guy, so to speak. But if you miss, whether, sometimes you miss on that RG3, the Rams, there's some risk there when you go up and try to get Jared Goff. With Carson Wentz and the Eagles, there's some risk. What if those teams sat back and just continued to draft quarterbacks until they found one? Hypothetically, the Rams or the Eagles, maybe they sit back and they just get a Paxton Lynch, and then later on they get a Dak Prescott, and then later on they get Jeff Driscoll. So now you've got these 3 quarterbacks in camp, and they found Dak Prescott over there instead of maybe trading up to go get a quarterback really high. So I think continuing to draft quarterbacks is a sound strategy until you find one, and you find your starter, or maybe you find a backup that eventually you could flip for more draft capital.
We are in agreement. All right, on to and sick name drop there, sick story drop there. All right, on to another one from JR Batman 23. What are your stat predictions for Oakland's beast mode?
I'm going to start with just touchdowns. I just think they're going to move the ball on offense in Oakland, so he's going to have a lot of touchdown opportunities. I think we'll see about 12 touchdowns for Marshawn, maybe 4.5 yards per carry. We're going to see him take advantage of running behind that offensive line, a big difference from what he was running behind in Seattle. I don't know what type of volume he'll be able to run with, but I think he's going to be pretty productive.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if, I'll say he gets 900 yards, because I just don't think he touches 200 carries. I don't think they want him getting 200 carries in that backfield. They have a number of talented running backs. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Elijah Hood, my favorite sleeper from this past draft, and who they got in the 7th round. But I just don't think that they're going to want to waste him thinking that they're a playoff team who needs him down the stretch, needs him in the playoffs. They're not going to, 30-plus-year-old running back coming off of a year where who knows what he did. And I just don't think that he ends up getting to. I wouldn't trust him as a top-tier fantasy option, I'll say.
Would you take Marshawn and really ease him in, something like 5 carries, 8 carries until the second half, and then rely on him a lot more down the stretch? Would you, if you know he's only going to get 200 to 250 carries, would you make them all second half type carries?
Yeah, I would not. I guess I'd say I wouldn't give him more than 10 for the first 8 weeks of the season, probably. Just, you don't need him. You don't need him that much to carry you, I'll say, with that offense.
I'd love to see that. I would love to see that. I mean, because it's still going to be, I think, Derek Carr's team. They've got a lot of weapons to pass to, but then, maybe you save Marshawn for when you need him.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen what he does in the playoffs. It's pretty impressive. All right, on to last one here from JR Batman. Who's the best Dolphin Backer in the league? Hashtag Dolphin Backer, in the league. Steve, maybe first explain to the people what Dolphin Backer is.
Yeah, that was when you and I were doing our draft podcast during draft season, January through April. We would make up a scouting term every single week and then, get the hashtag going and have all of you listeners try to ask the Mike Mayocks of the world, the Todd McShays, Mel Kuypers, hey, who's your favorite hashtag Dolphin Backer? Who's your favorite? What else do we have? Who has the best balance ratio? That was another one.
Ginsu knife.
That you made up. The Ginsu knife, hashtag Ginsu knife. And I even had my wife come in and make one up. I suggest you guys go back and listen to those draft episodes. Those were fun. But the Dolphin Backer was the short-armed, dorsal fin-looking linebacker who will come in with the strong flipper. And the guy who had the strong flipper, that's like your little underhand, block-shedding maneuver, we'll call it, Nick Kwiatkowski from the Chicago Bears. We threw that in his scouting report for the 2016 draft. He did an okay job as a mid-round rookie last year for the Bears, and he's got a real strong flipper. So I think he's the Dolphin Backer I'm looking for.
I will say this: I think Luke Kuechly is the class of the Dolphin Backers in the league right now. 31-inch arms. He obviously class of all linebackers in the league, but
does everything well.
The Dolphin Backer, the quintessential Dolphin Backer was Chris Borland. 29.25-inch arms.
Yeah.
If he was still in the league, there would be no competition. That is Mr. Dolphin. You might as well put Dolphin Backer on the back of his jersey.
Man, Chris Borland's 1 year was spectacular.
He could ball. Oh,
he got lost in coverage like a handful of times. He had a couple of ugly plays. But as far as the run game went, he was just flying to the ball. I mean, use every last gritty, gutty word to describe him.
Nice,
but that's not why he was good. He was good because he shed blocks and made plays. Man, he was awesome.
He was so sad that he retired. That 49ers fan should be sad too, because he would have made that run defense look a lot better last year. All right, on to Dylan McCrayer. I don't know. Dylan McCrayer. We'll see. He'll let us know. How does good, poor game planning get reflected in grades, if at all?
This is a good one. I don't know what you're going to take for an angle on this. I'm going to say, let me just use quarterback as an example. When a guy puts up really good stats and the grade is not particularly good, I think that's a great indicator of either really good game planning or poor defensive effort or a really good supporting cast by the quarterback. So I think there are some elements of, this quarterback threw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, and we can come back and say, you know what, though? Those were all extremely well game planned, or the defense was terrible, or his playmakers did all the work. So there are some times that the grade is a better indicator of a guy's performance than the stats, and the stats just kind of reflect that really good game plan. I think 2014 Andrew Luck was a really good example of that. They, as much crap as Pep Hamilton took as the offensive play caller in Indianapolis, he did an outstanding job when he was there of scheming open touchdowns in the red zone. Their red zone pass game was really, really good. So Luck had a ton of touchdowns, and a lot of them were just easy throws. So a lot of times the stats didn't always match up with how we graded them. That's just one example I have where I do think the grades can be reflected in, say, a good game plan.
Yeah, well, game planning is a little different, in my opinion, than, scheme. I'll just touch on this for a second. Game planning to me is like telling the corners or what to read, what keys to read, that sort of thing, who that they're going to be doubling, I don't know, stuff like that. The actual game planning for your specific opponent, we just can't know stuff like that. We can't know what they're being told in the huddle. That's stuff that really impossible to, as an outsider, account for. But I will say the scheme aspect of what a guy is asked to do in a certain scheme is something that I think doesn't necessarily come through in our grading to where we have to go to that next layer and find out, hey, how tough was this guy's job? Someone like Patrick Peterson's job at cornerback is going to be a lot harder than someone like Logan Ryan's probably was a season ago. That's just a fact of going back and watching. That's just a fact. Like, he was having much more difficult assignments as a cornerback, and as a grading, it's tough to necessarily account for, rolling a safety away from him and leaving a guy one-on-one, or rolling a safety over the top and having a guy double covered. It's just something that doesn't get necessarily, I'll say, accounted for well in our grading. It's something we have to go back and look for and sort of use our brains and football knowledge to add that layer on top of and to come to an ultimate opinion.
So a lot of times, with Logan Ryan, you'll say last year, in the last couple of years with New England, he had a good grade. But when you watch him, he's just a really good fit for what New England does. He plays a little bit in the slot. He plays off coverage. He'll play man coverage against some bigger receivers, and he just fits well. And they always seem to have a chaperone with him, a safety, right? When they're going to match him up, and a lot of times they'll leave Malcolm Butler on the island on the other side. So we can use that context. There's also other stuff within our data that kind of adds that level of context to to what a guy's job actually was. But you and I game planning is calling the right plays at the right time, though, too. That is a part of game planning. You kind of took a different angle where you said, here's what a guy's specifically asked to do. The one other example I'll use is, say, a defensive end picks up 3 sacks in a game, and, 2 of them are unblocked on stunts. Or, Aldon Smith a couple of years ago when Justin Smith is, holding the left guard every single time with his beautiful defensive hold illegal maneuver that he always got away with. He was opening up Aldon Smith. Aldon Smith had something like 10 unblocked sacks. And that year, I think he led the NFL in sacks, or he had 18 or 20 sacks or whatever it was, and he was not close to the highest graded pass rusher. And we just said, yeah, that's because he had all these scheme sacks. So there are times that our grades will probably be a better reflection of a guy's actual production as well. So it depends on the angle you're taking. Sometimes I think it's reflected. Other times it takes what you're saying, a little bit extra context or a dig deeper into the database to figure out what a guy's job really is.
Yeah, very good point there. Along the D-line. All right, let's move on to the stats life. He obviously knows this very well. He had a 4-part question. We'll get through them very quickly. First one is finishing overrated. That's just a yes. I mean, there's no explanation needed, right?
Yes. Go check out Draft Podcast, where you upset the offensive line community by saying that finishing is overrated. And I think you did a really good job of explaining yourself and backtracking.
Oh, I didn't backtrack.
Backtracking to the pressure of the. You're so afraid. You're afraid of all those guys. Who called you out? Assembly?
Oh, yeah.
Jeff
Schwartz,
Assembly, Cole, everybody.
Mike Golick just said I was an idiot or something. Very professional of him.
Notre Dame hate.
I know. I was going to say.
Notre Dame on Notre Dame hate right there, Mike.
I did like your son's group project once. Be nice to me. All right, number 2. Are left tackles more valuable than right tackles?
Equal value.
Equal value.
Equal value.
All tackles.
Left tackles are not more valuable.
All right. Number 3. Is Aaron Donald any good?
Yes.
Correct. All right. I agree. And number 4, when will Mike get a haircut? That's actually a very prescient timing. I was asking some friends the other day, should I get a haircut? they said no. So I'm not getting one anytime soon. We don't know. Question marks on that one.
We're setting up a video studio in the new office. I don't know what we're going to do with it yet, but it's being set up. There are rumblings around the office that you might find yourself on television shortly in some PFF type capacity. So keep your eyes tuned for that if you're in the Cincinnati area. I think the haircut needs to be under consideration, Mike, if you're going to be out in public.
I'll just say,
PFF.
Steve's one to talk. Check out Steve's picture on his Twitter and tell him. Ask which one of us has better hair.
Well-kept curly hair.
Okay, it is better kept than mine, but that doesn't really... you can't polish a turd, Steve.
It's always under control. Come on. It's always under control. But I'd consider it if I were you.
All right. Let's keep it moving. Alex Sharman 5 asked us, how do you project Amari Cooper going forward? What separates him from other wide receivers?
Separation. That's the answer right there.
Hey.
I like Cooper quite a bit. I do think he separates extremely well at all levels, short, intermediate, and deep. I think him and Derek Carr, Cooper kind of had this in college with Blake Sims, his quarterback there. They have a really good feel for throwing the fade ball, for the back shoulder stuff. I think Cooper can really beat you a number of different ways. He's not this guy that's going to, jump up and win a ton of contested catches or anything, but I just think he's a very shifty route runner. He's going to find himself open quite a bit as he enters his prime, and he's going to be a very productive receiver. I think the one question, sometimes we focus too much on drops here at PFF, but for him, it's been a legitimate thing. 2015, his rookie season, he dropped, 18 passes?
18 balls.
To
5
lead
this past season.
The NFL, and he was down to 5. So I'm not saying it needs to be 5 every year, but as long as he shows consistent hands, I think he'll be a very productive receiver.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of him. I mean, he had 1,150 yards. He was 1,154 yards last year, was 8th in the NFL in that regard. And Derek Carr did not even go for 4.
Still Derek, yeah.
Did not even go for 4,000 yards last year. It wasn't even that. It wasn't a high-powered passing offense, and he still went for 8th most yards in the NFL. I'd put him in that second tier. I think there's that tier 1 that's Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, and AJ Green at this point. I put him in that second tier that's close, guys like Mike Evans, T.Y. Hilton, guys like that. So that's where I'd have him. And my biggest thing with him, like you said, he separates at all levels. He's fantastic after the catch. I think his probably biggest area to improve is contested catches. He's good, not elite in that regard, I'd say. But I'm a huge fan. I really don't have issues with him whatsoever. I think he's, like I said, that second tier of elite receivers.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing him too, because that's what keeps him out of that Julio Jones and Antonio Brown tier. Antonio Brown can catch those tight window throws, those contested catches. We know Julio can. AJ Green's outstanding. Odell Beckham can beat you any which way. Yeah, Cooper's just a step below those guys, but yeah, still talking top 8 to top 10 type of receiver in the NFL.
Yep, big fan. All right, let's keep it moving. Once again, from more sodas than you, what will Martellus Bennett's impact be on the Packers offense? With Montgomery and Bennett, do you think the Packers will have a lot of new looks? New looks and Mike McCarthy don't really mesh, so I'm just going to say probably not on that regard. But what do you think, Steve?
I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, so probably not new, wrinkles or looks, but just better players. So I think Martellus Bennett, he's an upgrade over who they've had the last couple of years, whether it was Jared Cook last season, Richard Rodgers the last couple of years. Bennett, he's had an interesting career because he had times with the Chicago Bears where he was like a top 5 tight end. He dropped off a little bit last season when he was healthy for New England, and he battled injury the entire season. When he was healthy, he was really good. There were times when Gronkowski was hurt and he was the top tight end. They didn't really target him a ton, but he knows how to get open. He can beat man coverage. You can move him around a little bit. He's a good blocker. I think he's potentially the best tight end they've had over there in quite a while, again, if he stays healthy.
I think you actually touched on Martellus Bennett's biggest impact very briefly there, and I think it's his run in the run game is where he's going to add the biggest impact. They use an inline tight end a lot there in Green Bay to be a run blocker, and he's one of the best in the NFL. He's a top 5, so yes, as far as full-time tight ends go, he's a top 5 run blocker at the tight end position. I think he can add a lot in that regard over someone like Jared Cook, who really was adding nothing in that regard. So if you want that balance, like we talked about at the beginning with someone like Ty Montgomery, they'll have more of that because you have a better just overall, run blocking line.
Since coming into the league, Martellus Bennett came in 2008, had a negative run block grade that year. He's been above average every year since 2009. So backing up your point, the rare inline blocking tight end. So it does quietly add a lot of versatility to the offense. And he still has a lot, I think, still to give as a receiver. Again, if he stays healthy, big frame, caught 81.5% of his targets last year. He could be an efficient option thrown with, pairing with Aaron Rodgers. There's a lot to like.
And
there.
Rodgers' splits last year with and without Cook were pretty drastic. He needs that guy over the middle of the field to sort of make defenses respect that and not just sit on hitches to the outside. And one last point, I will say this. What little creativity Mike McCarthy has shown over the course of his tenure in Green Bay in terms of play calling has been motioning receivers from the slot to the backfield, vice versa, using Randall Cobb in roles like that. Now, Ty Montgomery, I think they will utilize Montgomery's dual threat nature, his ability to be a wide receiver and his ability to be a running back. I think that will play. They'll be more prepared for it this year in terms of they know he's a full-time running back now. They know they can do a lot more with him. I think that will be a much bigger part of their offense. So I do think that comes into play.
And just to wrap it up, the criticism last year was that they were just vanilla, and it was, hey, Jordy Nelson, go beat man coverage. Hey, Devontae Adams, go beat man coverage. And they didn't do a lot to scheme guys open. And if they do stick with that, Martellus Bennett is a guy that can get open on his own. So like you said, there might be some creativity, but they also don't, he's a guy that you could trust. If he earns Aaron Rodgers' trust early on, instead of Rodgers, bailing out of clean pockets, maybe he does chuck it up and let Bennett go up and make catches every now and again over smaller defenders. And I think they can add a lot of big plays to that offense.
That is a very good point. And go check out Scott Barrett, one of our fantasy guys, did a great thing about quarterbacks, their splits versus man and zone a season ago. Aaron Rodgers had one of the biggest differences in grade versus man versus grade versus zone. He was much worse at versus man, which just having more weapons will obviously help versus that. So there you have it. One last question here from Taylor Metrics, Taylor Wyman, who is actually the editor of this podcast. He said, what's something PFF tried to innovate with but never made it past internal testing? Well, Taylor, hiring a full-time podcast editor. All right, there you have it. That's the podcast for today. I'm Mike Renner, joined by Steve Palazzolo. Follow us on Twitter. I'm PFF_Mike. Steve is PFF_Steve. Make sure to leave that 5-star review on iTunes and leave your Twitter handle or email. Maybe you'll win PFF Elite. Maybe keep leaving some 5-star reviews and see if you win PFF Elite. We don't know. Have a good one, guys. We'll be back next Monday with some more early preseason content.